like to introduce our speaker, but I'm not going to say Mary Norton has lived here so long and she's the lovely wife of Dr. Bob Norton, and I'm not going to say all of that because everyone in this room knows that. What I want to tell you is, how many people in this room have worked on a committee or have worked with Mary Norton? She is one of the hardest researchers and workers around. Amen? Amen. So what you will see tonight will be the result of 3 or 4 years' work, maybe more. More. Because Mary was with Georgia Highlands and she became interested in this. We're going to be talking about that building that you pass all the time and the gentleman that was so instrumental in it. There's people in this room, Mary, I've been talking to them, who knew alphabet colors. Yeah. So Mary is going to talk to you about how her research went, one, to save the building. It's indicative of farming. It's indicative of what this county was about all the way back to the 1830s. One, to save the building. Two, to recognize a gentleman that did so much, not just for this county, but for cotton, period, throughout the South. So Mary needs no introduction, but please help me welcome her. Thank you, Mary. Thank you.
Well, I am very pleased to be here this evening. I was telling some folks that this has probably been the most fun presentation I've ever put together. And one of the things that made it fun is basically Alphabet Collins was loved. And back in the 30s and the 40s, everybody communicated with letters. So the generosity of folks, and I may be a little bit not as smooth as I want to be, but we'll see how I do. But when you work on a project about Alphabet Collins, there are lots of different organizations and individuals involved, and you see many of them on this first slide. And so what happens, each person here has a different picture of Alphabet Collins. You know, at Georgia Highlands, when I worked at Georgia Highlands, I worked with Alphabet Collins from 1932 to about the 1970s. And then a group of us decided we needed to nominate Alphabet Collins to the UGA Hall of Fame, and then I met Sam and Gloria Graham. Well, Sam went back to 1917 and brought us to 1932, and you begin to see a very, very different picture about the gentleman. And so what I've done is put together a series of slides, and I use a lot of quotes because people love to write. And so you see a picture of Alphabet Collins from people who knew him and who worked with him, as well as some of Alphabet Collins' own personal comments. He was referred to, and I'm getting ahead of myself, but it's okay. He was referred to in a Rotary brochure that was put together in, I think, 1957 as the Herb Schreiner of the South. And if I had to look him up, I didn't know who Schreiner was, and he was a humorist and had a radio show and a TV show. So you're going to see some evidence of this gentleman as we go through. I'd like to get a sense, how many people in the room knew personally Alphabet Collins or know his name? Could I just get a show of hands? Okay, so there's a group. How many people know about the Georgia Institute of Genetics and what they did? Okay, again, good group. How many of you have heard the phrase, Cartersville had to buy the land twice to build the Cartersville campus? Okay. Well, the rest of you, by the end of this presentation tonight, you're going to know the rest of the story behind that phrase, or at least I hope you do. So you can tell, Janet, you can tell Bobby I did it. All right. Because Bobby was one of the ones. When I first met Bob Neal, he made that phrase to me, said it to me, and I didn't know what it meant. But when you work on a project like this over a period of time, you really get a sense of what that means. And I think you'll enjoy the story, and it'll probably surprise you a little bit. Okay, what we're going to do is start. I learned about Alphabet Collins when I worked at Georgia Highlands for Dr. Pierce. And Dr. Pierce got involved, Willis Potts, our local Board of Regents, got involved, And they were trying to figure out a way to save that building. And so they were in constant communication with the Board of Regents. And the Board of Regents kept saying, you need to do a master plan. So way back when, and this is about 2008, Bartow County, or Georgia Highlands, did a master plan. And they saw the Georgia Institute of Genetics as a possible community center. Well, it didn't happen. Randy Pierce retired. And let's see, Randy retired. There were changes at the Board of Regents. So the next thing that happened is you get to meet John Murphy. Now, John Murphy and his, I don't know which daughter, but I know some of the daughters, and John's family is here tonight. So Bonnie, raise your hand, and all three daughters raised their hand. So their father, and this is a very interesting story because John Murphy worked for Alphabet Collins. And he was a supervisor with Alphabet Collins from about 1947 to 1957, is that about right? And so what happened is, and this is funny how things, the dots connect up or the moon and stars line up, but John Murphy wrote a letter to Chancellor Huckabee, and he said, you need to honor this guy on the campus because he did so much with that campus. And so he wrote the letter, and then Dr. Chancellor Huckabee met with Rimba Watterson, who was the interim director or interim president at Georgia Highlands, and she said, Mary, do you know anything to Alphabet Collins? Can you find anything about him? Well, that little bit of research developed into this 3-inch binder that you see over here with 31 tabs, and nobody knew what they were getting into. But as I said, that binder has everything about Alphabet Collins from 1932 to his death in 1971. And then what's even more interesting, and we're going to get into what did he do, but after Collins passed away and the University System of Georgia received all of that land as a gift, then half of that binder is staff at the Board of Regents going back to the Attorney General of the state of Georgia and saying, can we use this money for other things? Now, that's going to make sense as we move further along, but it's just interesting how that came to be. So, John Murphy, great guy, and so I got involved and did the binder and started meeting with Bonnie and John, and they would tell me stories to fill in, and it was great fun. So, and John's probably, I'll cry when I say this, but John is probably watching this tonight because he passed away. I told Bonnie I'll cry when I say it, but she's crying too. But this man was absolutely passionate about this structure. And I sort of adopted his point of view about it all. So anyway, next slide up. Then we get to the last fall, and a group of us, and I think Paul had this newsletter, Agri Bulletin or something, and then on the front page of Agri Bulletin was this Georgia Agri Hall of Fame. And so nobody knew anything about it, but we got people like Diane Tate, Becky Champion, Paul Pugliese, Commissioner Taylor. We all got together and said Alphabet Collins would be a great nominee to the Agri Hall of Fame. So we came together, and then soon Sam and Gloria Graham joined the team. And so what happened when Sam joined the team is you see binder 2. And this does not even include the files box that I have at home. So we have more information on Alphabet Collins than you would ever imagine. So anyway, that result, and I would have brought more stuff, but I couldn't carry it. So I just said, I'll just stop here. Now, we were quite disappointed because the person who got the nomination this year was Jimmy Carter. So you lose to a president, right? However, when we called to talk with them about the nomination, the woman that we spoke to basically said, she said the nominating committee thought that was a very strong nomination. And so they have decided to roll your nomination over to 2019. And so, I'm thinking, well, do they do that for everybody? I didn't know. She said, and I need to tell you, not all nominations we received this year were being rolled over. So I mean, if this happens, everybody in this room will know about it because we will promote it, believe me. But we're excited about that possibly happening. I see why I can't see this paper is because I don't have my glasses on, so let me see if I can do better. What I'm going to do in the next, let's see, we got to be out of here by 8 or Diane's going to use the hook on me. We have basically 45 minutes to cover a 60-year time frame. And so, as I said, we're going to use slides, and I'm going to talk about Collins' professional impact on cotton. Now, I met, where's my friend who's met Alphabet Collins, and she did road crops, truck crop? Who am I? I'm sorry. Right here. Yes. We talked. She said Collins did not just focus on cotton. And I know that, but for the purposes of tonight, you'll see more focus on cotton, but he was involved with sorghum, okra, like that first picture that you saw when it had extraordinaire, collaborate, that's in his okra patch. So he did a lot of other things, but I'm actually going to combine professional and personal qualities because it took a unique kind of guy to pull this off. And you'll see that particularly when he comes to Bartow County. The second thing I want to talk about is the legacy that Collins lives, because the legacy that he and that original Board of Trustees left impacts Georgia agriculture today. And again, that'll make more sense as we go through this. And then the third thing, and it's not on the slide, but sort of as I got to the end of this, I have some personal observations, that I'm not sure I'm connecting all the dots correctly, but at least some personal impressions that I have about Collins. So we'll get into each of those. All right, I've already done a number of these. Okay, so here we are at UGA, and Collins is a senior at UGA, and he has already decided his goal in life is to be a scientific plant breeder. Now, I had no idea what any of that meant, but that was his number one goal. And so a fella outside of Athens, and I'm going to do this first slide before I do the second one. People ask, why is his name called Alphabet? His real name is Morris William Hallival Collins, or M.W.H. And this is the first reference I could find to his name Alphabet, because this was in the campus paper, and they referred to him as, incidentally, a big worker. So this guy, by the name of Smith, goes to UGA, the Department of Agriculture, and says, I've got land, but I don't know anything about scientific plant breeding. Is there someone here that you could recommend could work with me? And of course, they came up with Alphabet Collins. And so together, they formed a partnership, each supplying what the other lacked. Now, Alphabet, even when he graduated, he continued to work on scientific plant breeding, and he came up in 1922 with his first cotton seed, first cotton that had some resistance to the boll weevil. And this cotton ended up winning a national prize of $1,000, and they got a gold medal. So that's cotton plant number one that he ended up doing. So when he leaves UGA, he gets his first job working as an extension agent. He's down in Madison. And I love this slide because the way he would communicate with local farmers, he'd have articles in the newspaper. And so this is an example. We all know we're up against a serious situation. We can overcome the situation. Individually, we can do it in time. Together, we can do it sooner. I can help. Let's go. Now, keep in mind, when he's in Madison, this year will mark the beginning of an agricultural revolution. Now, when I first read this, I said, well, he must have been there for a number of years. He was only there 8 months because the funding for these positions were eliminated due to a number of things that happened with the Supreme Court of Georgia, and they could not use the money to pay for their salaries. So what ends up happening is he goes back to Athens, and this is one of the things that you see over and over again that Collins, UGA loves Alphabet Collins. And so if something happens job-wise, they find something for him. So you saw in his resume, you know, if something happened, as it did in Madison, 8 months, he made his mark, he goes back, and the next thing you know, he is in Rome, Georgia. And he's working, again, as an extension agent, and Sewell is the president of the State College of Georgia, agriculture, and so in 1923, he goes to tour a demonstration farm. Now Collins, I don't know how long he's been in Rome, but he's got 100 different farmers doing a demonstration farm in Rome. And so the head of the agriculture says there's no reason why this program should not be extended throughout the state of Georgia. Again, he's making his mark. The other thing that you see in this slide is the networking, and I'm going to talk about his networking. I mean, he kept in very close contact with UGA and the president and members of the foundation. Now, what happens is an interesting story when he is, let me go back one. Well, I don't know, I think I missed one, excuse me, but I'll just say this as a result. When he's in Rome, he ends up producing a bale per acre despite the boll weevil. And the way that happens is one of the farmers is, planting his cotton, and they see a stalk of cotton that's very different. It's taller, the fiber is different, and so he calls Alphabet Collins in, and so the two of them start working together. They nurture that plant, they use the seed, they replant it, and pretty soon he says, we've got something special here. And in typical Alphabet Collins fashion, he looks around and says, who could I interest in this seed? And if you go to, actually one of the things, he got some award for having done the cotton, and he makes the statement, he disclaims any credit for having those 100 farms. He said plant breeding is 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration. So he then, this is what I meant. Sorry, I missed it. I got ahead of myself. I couldn't find it. So basically, they got the cotton. It had extra cotton bolls and longer cotton fiber. So he looks around and says, okay, who'd be interested? And I love this because this is Lee Wilson and Company. Now, I grew up in Northeast Arkansas, and my dad was a cotton farmer. And I always say I started at age 5 with a pillowcase. And Janet Queen is the only person I know who's taught me and how much cotton she can pick in any one day, for those of you who know Janet. But this is in Northeast Arkansas. And so basically Alphabet goes, and he goes with the local farmer. He shows them the cotton seed, and Lee Wilson hires him. And so he becomes the chief plant breeder for the Wilson plantation, and he stays in Northeast Arkansas for 6 years. And so this is just down the street from where I grew up. It's Mississippi Delta farmland. And it's interesting, it's like how dots come together. This was their anniversary. They were celebrating 100 years. And so for those of you who are familiar with the Mississippi Delta farmland, there used to be forests there. And I guess they cut down all the forest and people sold their land, but not Lee Wilson. Lee Wilson bought the land and worked out a system of how to manage the water. Now, the Lee Wilson plantation in 1925 was 65,000 acres. So Alphabet goes to the biggest cotton breeder that he can find, and he has 25,000 of those acres are planted in cotton. And again, he stays there for 6 years. He ends up, cotton business goes south. He has to leave Wilson, and he comes back, and UGA finds a position for him in Calhoun. And he stays in Calhoun for 1 year. And I don't know what happened in Calhoun, why it was only 1 year, but while he was in Calhoun, he was talking to folks in Bartow County. And he was finding people like Jimmy Neal and people who basically respected what he was doing. And so by the way, before I go to this one, this is his second cotton boll that he originated. So it was basically the Wilson type big boll. So he now has 2 cotton seed under his belt. And so I found it interesting. He goes to Calhoun, then ends up in Bartow County. And this is where I met him originally. Now, I didn't realize at the time that this guy had 17 years of experience doing scientific plant breeding. He had 2 cottonseed that he originated, and he had years of experience working, and I know Dean Bagwell saw this happen immediately, or his family saw it happen. When he came to Bartow County, he reached out to local farmers, and he started a program, something that's called the Crop Improvement Program. And he began a system of plant cottonseed breeding and seed distribution, which had a remarkable impact on Bartow County. And I was talking to Mr. Dabbs this afternoon, and he brought some articles in, and he said, people don't know, what happened in Bartow County and the production of cotton. They were winning state awards because there was more cotton produced here in Bartow County than any other county in the state of Georgia. So he started working, and he wanted to make available to Georgia farmers a good quality cottonseed. And again, think of his background. He was a scientific plant breeder. That's where he said, this is where you focus your time. And he ended up having 25 farmers, and they produced more bales of cotton than the total county production of 16 other counties in the state. So he's making money. So what he does, and this is, we will have a copy of this proposal at the Bartow History Museum as well as the library. This is not a long proposal, but it is a wonderful proposal about how he basically worked with, how he got the Georgia Institute of Genetics started. Because he said, and he wrote it all out. He said, this is what Bartow County needs to do. Because at the time, if you were a cotton farmer in this area, you got your cotton seed from 3 different places. Namely, you got them from commercial seed companies, but usually that seed was too expensive, and the local farmer could not afford to buy it. There were also something called experiment stations in Georgia. But these guys did not know how to produce the quantity of cottonseed in volume. Or there was something called farmer seed stock. And this is where the farmer had their own, they grew their seed and they sold the cottonseed for whatever they could get it for. And so when Collins started working in 1933-34, he found many Bartow County farmers were using an inferior cottonseed. So he decided what we need to do is basically, and he said this because I am a plant breeder, and he ends up saying, he says in this paper that I was referencing a while ago, the proposal, he says there's an art and a science to being a plant breeder. And he goes in his low-key style, he says, in addition to practicing the science of plant breeding, I have more than an ordinary endowment in the art of plant breeding. And he said, I say this with utmost humility. It's just merely stating a fact. And he said, the faculty at UGA knew it, I know it. Therefore, he said, what we really need to do, and you will see here how the line goes up, 42, there are about 32 cooperatives, and you end up having a waiting list by 46, 47, it's going up to over 140 cooperatives of farmers who are working. And there's a waiting list. You can't just do this. It starts out in Bartow County, but pretty soon the surrounding counties are involved. And so Northwest Georgia is breaking all sorts of records. So that's when you see his efforts. And around 46, he decided, he's been working from 32 to 46, working with this crop improvement program. He says, we really got to get focused. So they said, Paul told me that the way the UGA works, if you are a special agent, you can focus on one thing. Now, did Avery Holland come, Paul, at the time? So Avery Holland came at the time Alphabet was given the special agent status. Well, evidently, when he contacted a fellow by the name of Skinner at UGA, he was head of the Extension Service, he said they turned him down. They said no. And so Jimmy Neal wrote this letter, and I thought you would appreciate this. He said, when you read this, you'll be even more convinced I'm like the itch and that I never cease to annoy. And he said, I believe your error in judgment is caused from a misunderstanding as to the breadth and scope of the Georgia Institute of Genetics. So not only did he engage and empower local farmers, his board of trustees was with him every step of the way. And so here again, in that early period of 1946, you see him. So the Genetic Institute was organized. And again, he's trying to provide high quality seed to local farmers. He establishes a board of directors, and the top 5 names were from Bartow County. But he knew he had to include other folks who lived outside the county in order to receive statewide support. And so McDonough was a vice president of Georgia Power, and Pappy was a member of a manager of White Provisions Company in Atlanta. So this was the first 5 were the original board of directors, and then 2 years later, they added McDonough and Pappy to the list of trustees. So one of the first things they did is, and again, I'm fascinated by the date, because here you've got somebody who starts the institute, he gets the foundation, and these guys decide we need a charter. And they went to Rome and they hired a law firm that basically also had worked with Berry College in developing their charter. And so they developed a charter that not only looks at the growth of the Georgia Institute of Genetics, but what happens if it's no longer meeting a need. So they built into their contract a special statement that's going to come up in a few minutes. So they got the charter, then he went out and started raising money. And local farmers gave between 50 cents and $7,000 to basically become a member. And there were 60 farmers, and in his annual report, he has names of everybody. So he has the names and how much money they gave. In addition, our local Chamber of Commerce gave $7,500. And then Swift and Company and Atlanta Family Foundation gave $40,000. And what they did with this money, they used it to buy land. So the Georgia Institute of Genetics originally had the Felton property. And he also made this comment about the people who gave money. He said they were so generous. They were from business, mining, farming, professional people of Cartersville. Almost without exception, the answer to solicitation was, I'm interested, I want to do my part, how much should I give? And so he's fundraising, he's establishing the foundation, they've got a charter, and this is, Sam put this together so you can see the property. The number here is about 396 acres, but we think it's probably a little bit over 400, somewhere in there. But that's the Bratton family and the Bishop family farm. And again, in his reports, he talks about Sam, do you remember the name of the guy who had been farming there for 30 years and he just didn't want to let the land go? Was it Bishop or Bratton?
It was Bratton.
Bratton, and he talks about how Bratton loved this farm, and so he basically made a good deal. He held out till he got the price that he wanted. So you've got the land that they purchased, and the next thing you know, he's also working on a crop improvement program with local farmers. Now you've got well over 100 cooperatives working at this time, and Bartow County is being acknowledged as having the best production record in the state of Georgia. And here you see, oops, the wrong pen. Here you see, this guy right here is Dean. His name is help me, Dean. A. Frank Smith, Dean Bagwell's great-grandfather. So he is getting an award. Here's Alphabet Collins in the middle, and then the head of the Crop Improvement Association in the state of Georgia is giving them their trophy. So again, it's the management of putting the building together and continuing to work with local farmers. This man is very laser focused. And I don't know how he had any energy to sleep, but this is, again, in a very short period of time, he's doing all this. Now, we talked about buying the land. I want to shift gears a little bit to the legacy, because I think this is an important story. It is basically, whoops, I have too many things here to work. I'm going to come back to that one. I hope you can see this. The big number to look at is at the bottom. It's almost $13 million. Now remember, when that charter was put together, there was something that is stated in that charter that says, we will gift this land to UGA, and they can sell the land if they need to sell it, but the proceeds have to be used for agri education and experimentation. And so half of my binder that I said a while ago is as the new presidents come into UGA, they say, can we use this money for X, or how much? Now, I think this number right here, 12,767,000, is a low number, because it doesn't count an investment strategy that they had. It's strictly, Sam and I were able to go back and get every deed of all this land that was sold, and you can see here you see Lowe's, you see Home Depot, Lowe's, Walmart. Then you see Georgia Highlands campus. Then you got the Clarence Brown Conference Center. And then you've got the Georgia Department of Transportation. You probably saw the Mark Harris article that was in the paper. This one right here is still pending, right here. But they sold 27 acres valued at $3,375,000. So here you've got this money that's being managed by the Board of Regents, and it is used for agri education and experimentation. Now, a number of years ago, we were working with some students who were extremely smart on the computer, and they went back to the Board of Regents minutes, which is public documents. I wouldn't know how to even begin to find this, but the students found out that some of the money in this fund, I have no idea what it's currently valued at, but some of the money in this fund was used by UGA and Georgia Tech to buy land. Again, it's keeping within what it was supposed to be used for, farmland for agri education and experimentation. But I think this surprised me. Does this number surprise you all? Did people know that this had happened? Okay, I'm not seeing a lot of nods. I'm seeing, because I was surprised. I mean, I thought, well, that's a big chunk of change, And so anyway, it took me by surprise. Now what I'm going to do is go back and talk about some professional observations or personal observations that I have. This is a picture of Alphabet Collins and his second wife. Her name is Helen Henson. And Bonnie told me that she always referred to Mr. Collins as Mr. Collins. That's what she called him. And so what happens is when you're reading all this information about Alphabet Collins, you don't read about the family. And so we learned that in 1917, he married a young woman from Athens, and he had 4 children very quickly. And so you can remember when we were talking about, he goes to Madison. After 8 months, he's back at Athens, and then he goes to Rome, and he's there for a couple of years, and then he goes to Wilson Plantation for 6. He's back in Calhoun. Somewhere in there, something happens with that first relationship. And the other thing that happened with learning about the family, again, Sam's a great researcher, so he found the name of the grandchildren. So Sam said, Mary, you can call. I don't want to call. So I get on the phone, and I found 2 of his grandchildren, one by name of Johnny and the other Susan. And so I introduced you don't know me, but this is what we're doing. We're trying to nominate your grandfather to the UGA Agri Hall of Fame. And so we found, and not that we have obviously a close relationship, but 2 phrases that they said that I remember. One is when Johnny talked to me, he said, my father, Morris, again, Alphabet's son, was a very loving man, and he wanted us to know their grandfather. And so he says, I can remember when I came to Cartersville, and we went to the church was filled. And all these people were standing outside on the sidewalk, and I didn't understand that. I didn't understand because there was not that much information. And then when I talked to Susan and I called her back to tell her that he did not get the nomination, and I told her, there's a chance in 2019, she said, this has been very good for our family. So out of the 4 children, we have reconnected with one family. Do not know about the others. All 3 of his children have passed, so it is the grandchildren of those other 3 children that I don't know what happened. But that has been, so I think it's the unintended consequences when you have somebody who is so focused on his life and being the best scientific plant breeder. There's a cost to that. And that's my words. Those are not something where anybody wrote it down. I just say it had to have a cost, particularly based on my personal conversation that I had with his 2 grandchildren. The next thing I wanted to focus on was Collins' extracurricular activities. He was president of the Cartersville Rotary Club, and he was also president of the UGA Alumni Society, and he was the first person from the Department of Agriculture to have a presidential role, and so he took it very seriously. He said, what I've got to do is basically go to every alumni association across the state of Georgia and meet and talk with them. So he was very committed to doing that. And so this is in one of his reports that he did. I can't remember which one it is. I think it's the 1957 report. But he said, I do not think the affairs of the institution have suffered too much during this year because of this division of my time. But if they have, even in the slightest, all I can say is the call of duty and love to and for my alma mater could not be put aside, and I have no regrets. It is said, never offer excuses. One's friends do not require them, and enemies won't believe them anyhow. So he felt very strongly about what he needed to do for UGA, he needed to do. And again, that goes back to the connection with UGA. Then the Rotary Club, and this again is I think it's now the Wednesday Club, ended up nominating Alphabet Collins for an international director position in 1956. And somebody in the community found this pamphlet that you saw, and they gave it to us to look at. And it was just, I picked out some of the comments. Trey, again, has this pamphlet in the Bartow History Museum office, but these were some of the things that I picked out. He wasn't a great speaker, but he's a good talker, brief, concise, noted for his homespun wit, has often been called Georgia's Herb Schreiner. He may not be the best district president we've ever had, but probably the best loved one. A striking exemplification of our great slogan, service above self, for all of you who are Rotary members. He never straddles an issue, and when he takes a position, you can rely upon it because he will stand up to be counted. And then I just threw this last one in because it was fun. He gets along with the ladies too. The only man we know of who is past president of a ladies' garden club. So there you go. But those were some of his extracurricular activities. This next one is interesting because I think he was the king of networking. By the way, am I going too fast? Is this pace okay? Okay. He was the king of networking. I mean, this man, wherever he was, he met whoever was in charge. And one of the things that he did when he established this genetic institute, he said, it's very important that I be a collaborator, not seen as a competitor. You remember those experimental stations that we talked about? We need to work with these guys. We don't need to work against them. So one of the things that he ended up doing is, now the name is wrong here. This, instead of White, should be Wilson. I just didn't pick it up in time to change it. He was director of the extension work for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And he invited Collins to come. And I think does the name Judge Trevor mean anything to anybody? A Judge Trevor? Because I guess Trevor reached out to Collins, or reached out to Wilson and said, we're doing something pretty unique here in Bartow County. You need to come see it. So he did. He came, and then Jimmy Neal, again, who was the secretary for the Board of Trustees, ended up writing him a letter. And this is the letter that that Jimmy Neal received from Wilson. And I'm not going to read the whole letter, but one of the things that he says in his position, he said he understands human nature and people get a little over-enthusiastic about their projects. You know, they think it's just great, but with the passage of time, people get tired, you know, it goes by the wayside. He said, I was quite surprised to observe two things in Cartersville. First, he says, I think the idea that's backing the Institute is absolutely sound, and this is a real service which it can perform and not in any manner duplicate the work of the experiment stations. So again, collaboration. And so you see, even though the original work that Collins did at the Genetic Institute was to develop the seed, it became more efficient for him to work with the experiment stations. They would develop the seed, but he had the system to multiply that in volume. So because he had all of these different farmers in Northwest Georgia who were willing to do it. And so he says, I think, and he's saying this to Neal, he says, I think to you, you have been able to render on the legal and organization side the same kind of service that Collins had on the agricultural side. So you get the partnership between the Board of Trustees. One name that I did not mention, again, this is one that's going to come up next, Callaway Gardens. And so when the Institute is getting started, Jimmy Neal and some of the other Board of Trustee members go down to meet Callaway. And Callaway gives him $500. And so this is a correspondence that he writes to Callaway in 1950. You just cannot imagine what a tremendous impact your interest in this project here has upon other people. When you put your stamp of approval on something, it's just like having the mark sterling on a piece of silver. So he's keeping that relationship with Callaway going. Then he also has a committee. Now he's got, and I've moved so fast, Dean, I can't find, I think it's this one. This is the Technical Advisory Committee that he formed in Bartow County, for part of the crop improvement. You're nodding, so I'm okay on this. That he formed, and again, Dean's grandfather was the chair of that committee. And so what Collins did is formed a small committee, three farmers, three local farmers, and they served in an advisory capacity with this large group of other farmers. And then he also took directors of key state agencies that included the Dean of the College of Agriculture, the Director of the Extension Service, the Seed Certification Agronomist, and Director of the Experimental Stations. And he brought them together as again, a director of key state advisory folks. So they formed another advisory group. So he's working hard to make sure that people are working with him and they're supportive of the Institute. Now, my unanswered questions, I go through all of this, and I said, I had this presentation for Bob Neal's Rotary last month, and something happened and I had to reschedule. Well, I was ready last month. I really was. And so I told Bob Norton I was ready. And so every day since, I've been reading more, and I keep finding key pieces of information. And I say, I forgot it. This is a lot of detail, and I am not. I've had to learn about seed and all this sort of stuff. I don't know anything about that. But my unanswered questions. One is, what happened after 1957? Because here's a man who's doing these annual reports, and he goes into tremendous detail about the finances, who's on the board, who's giving money. And after 1957, nothing. I can't find it. So if anybody has any records that go from 1957 to 1967, let us know. Because Mr. Dabbs brought things in this afternoon that none of us had ever seen before, so Sam's going to copy it so we have it for our research files. What happened is, and this is a glimpse into something that happened. This is what I found as the first reference, and this came from the Neal Law Firm files. One of the things that was extremely helpful is Billy and Bob Neal gave us 4 files, and that's where a lot of these letters came from. And so there was a letter in there that sometime, and this was written in 1973 by William Shadden, who is now chairman of the Board of Trustees. And so he talks about in 1967, the Board of Trustees decided that it was time to begin winding up the business of the Institute. And we also know in this letter that Collins had declining health. So that was my only reference. Now, you remember that the head of Georgia, the vice president of Georgia Power, McDonough, yes. One of the things that he did is he wrote a letter to Alphabet Collins. He had missed a meeting, and this was back in, I don't know, 1949. And he said, you know, what are we doing for your understudy? You know, who's going to continue on the work? So that whole idea of succession planning found no reference afterwards. But McDonough raised that as an issue. So again, I don't know what happened during that time period. It was 1949, I just found it. I am curious, and then again, this is another unanswered question for me. I understand that UGA was a strong supporter of Alphabet Collins. And I had initially thought, you know, where it said the $40,000 that came in from a private foundation, in the back of my head, I thought that was UGA. It wasn't. It really wasn't. So I was trying to figure out why. Why did that Board of Trustees, they're all local Cartersville people who did that charter, how did Collins work with those original 5 guys to basically develop a charter that said, if this institute no longer needs to be here, all of the assets go to UGA. And again, this is connecting dots, and I have no validation of this at all. But when I worked with John Murphy, and I interviewed John, so it's on tape now, but what John would say to me is when I would work with Alphabet, he would walk out of the gym and he would wave his hand and he would say, there would be a college here someday. So my own, again, it's nothing to validate that on, but I just keep thinking, I can't imagine these guys putting something like that in writing and not have some sort of affection for this community and what all the people in this community did. Because this is the community that got mobilized in the 1940s and raised money. And I can't find it in here anywhere because I just can't find it, so I'm going to paraphrase the quote. But one of the things that Collins did in one of his reports, it's not a great year for cotton growers in Georgia, but he's looking at the amount of cotton that the surrounding counties come up with, and their income revenue was about $500,000. The revenue for Bartow County was $2.5 million. So he says, in his low-key way, I think this had to do with the Georgia Institute of Genetics, and that's a lot of money that Bartow County got from the work that we've been doing. So again, that's Mary making up a rumor, but it's just, when you read this stuff and you read it over and over again, it just doesn't make sense to anybody. Does anybody else have a perspective about that you can share about why would somebody leave all of that money?
Well, he loved the University of Georgia. I don't know, did any of those other people attend UGA as well?
Couldn't find. Collins was a lifetime trustee of the foundation. And he was also, as I said, ran the Alumni Association one year. And I guess my other unanswered question, and I'll conclude with this statement, is what action can the Bartow community take to preserve the Georgia Institute of Genetics structure? I said, Sam Graham has been unable to identify another structure similar to this in the state of Georgia. So we have a real treasure in Bartow County. And the best I can tell, there has not been stabilization work done in 2003. Trey is taking a group of people out to, I think you're doing a farming day. Is that where you, Trey? Are you farming day on Saturday? Is that right? And you're visiting a number of places, and they will be stopping by the Genetic Institute. I am hopeful that this is something Georgia Highlands will look at considering in their master planning as they move forward, particularly now that the second academic building is finished and they're going to be having the ribbon cutting. But the truth is, I don't know. So next time you see, I told Steve I was going to say this, next time you see Steve Taylor, you just tell him, we need to save the Georgia, we need to save the building. Because they call what Collins was doing, it was described as a one variety community. And it basically changed the fundamental practices and economies of cotton production in the southern part of the United States. So, you know, when you're used to making half a bale per acre, and all of a sudden you're making 2.5 bales per acre, that means a fair amount of change coming into this economy. And I think it made a significant difference in people's lives. So if anyone has ideas, thoughts on preservation, Bob, I'm saying this publicly in front of you, but call me. Here's a business I keep telling him I'm putting this to rest, but I'm just not quite ready yet. So here are business cards. If you would like to join with a discussion, if you have stories that you want to share about Alphabet Collins, I've got this clipboard that we'll pass around. Robert Dabb's name is already on here, but if you've got a story, we don't want to lose your story. And Diana, I'll give you a pen too. Here's a pen.
When exactly was it built?
It was the 1945-47 time period. It was the gin was built first, and then they have the house and the garage. So the gin was built. The house was built after the institute. I looked it up, and that's why I want to say around 19. Bonnie, am I right? 47, 48 was when it was. Okay. Okay. In that time period, the photos that you see out there were given to us by the son of the guy who designed the Georgia Institute of Genetics. And his name is Aeck, A-E-C-K, and that architectural firm is still in Atlanta. It's now called Lord Aiken Sargent, but he said we are welcome to use those photos, and as long as we give him credit. So if you haven't had a chance to look at them, please do so. They're great black and white photos. And you see the inside, and Tina Shadden, who works with Trey at the museum, told me there's one photo that has the picture of the inside of the Georgia Institute of Genetics, and there are Empire seed bags. And he said, if anybody has an Empire seed bag tucked away in their resources, to please let the Bartow History Museum know, because that's something that they would love to have. So again, cards are here, clipboard going around, and I would love to follow up if anyone has thoughts on what we might be able to do. I want to close tonight with the following Alphabet Collins quote. And this was a quote that was at the end of one of his annual reports, and we put it in the nomination to the UGA Agri Hall of Fame. And he basically says, if present trends continue, it is imperative we learn more and more to make 2 blades of grass where one grew before. I cannot willingly abandon my life dream of trying to breed and grow more and better cotton seed stock. And at the end of this quote, he says, I'm not a diplomat, not an economist, or even much of a financier, but as a plant breeder, I feel sure we need now and will continue to need more and better seed stock for all the years to come. So I thought that was a powerful, Becky and I worked on the final draft of the nomination, and I thought that was, powerful statement to make. Questions? We're still, I don't get the hook yet. It's 10 to 8, so, yes?
Are you going to tell us about they had to pay for the land twice?
Well, if you saw that sheet of paper where they sold, when Bartow County was, Georgia Highlands campus was there, Clarence Brown had to pay $2.5 million to build that campus. And so that's where the phrase, and the first person I remember, for those of you who remember Sam Smith, the banker, and his father was owner of Smith Gym, and Sam says he can remember his father saying, I don't want to buy this land again. But you've got those original group of farmers, those 70 farmers. You've got the foundation from Georgia, from Atlanta. They raise $100,000. They go out and they buy that 400 acres of land, which in turn around 300 of it is given to the Board of Regents. And so when Walmart came in, a lot of these for-profits came in, you know, they had to buy the land, and that's the numbers that you see. But we interviewed Clarence Brown, a couple of us did, a number of years ago, and he said one of the presidents before Randy Pierce came in to see him, and he said, Clarence, I've got good news and bad news for you. He says, you're going to get your campus. He said, the bad news is you're going to have to pay for it. So Clarence ended up, you know, not only paying for the land, but it's my understanding, and anybody can correct me, he also put a fair amount of money in for infrastructure. So, so this community, in terms of support of Georgia Highlands, goes back a long way. I mean, I think it was very visionary. And I like John Murphy saying that Collins said there'll be a college here someday. You know, it just has a good feel to it, and that somebody was thinking ahead, just, you know, how many 50 years ahead of their time, so to speak. Does that answer your question? Okay. Any other questions from the group? Well, we'll keep you posted on what happens. And I thank you for your interest, and we'll do it again.
This is a story that would never have been told had Mary not gradually become interested as an employee of Georgia Highlands and then took it on to the Genetic Institute and then this gentleman. So thank you, Mary, on behalf of Bartow County. This meant you held everyone's attention. They loved it tonight.
Well, thank you.
And this meant a lot to people who knew Alphabet Highlands, knew the story, but maybe not the whole story. So we do appreciate you coming tonight. We ask that you join us in preserving Bartow County and being a member of the Alabama Historic Society. Come to any of our programs. They are open. You see our hospitality committee knocks themselves out. We appreciate it, ladies. So be careful getting home, and good night. Thank you.